Good morning, everybody. Sao Shan Hao. Wow. Selamat pagi. Yeah. And Kalai Balakam. So, thank you for coming. These are the slides if you want to download them and watch them in your devices while they're here. Yesterday the projector was a little bit blurry, so I decided to share them before the presentation. And in any case, you can also download them later. Today, let me start with the bad news. Yesterday you watched the good presentation about navigation, and there's another one today. But I still think that I can provide a different point of view and some complementary details that were not mentioned yesterday. So I'm going to talk about navigation, and this is the agenda that I have prepared in order to talk about navigation. I will start by talking a little bit about navigation in the terms of an advanced architecture. And in order to do that, I will mention how to split the responsibilities, how to assign different responsibilities to different classes, different objects, different types. I will also present a modular solution, which has very similarities to what Summer introduced yesterday. And I will introduce this solution both for storyboards and also in case you prefer a SIPs-only solution. So I know that we are all developers and we know we can do it better. So if you want to go with storyboards, that's fine. If you don't want storyboards for any other reason, then that's also fine. And I will try to satisfy both options. And I will mention some of the benefits of this modular solution, which I think there are some that are very valuable here. And I will end with a brief recap that will hopefully mention the key takeaways of this presentation. So let me start with an architecture. And what you have on the screen now is a picture of the very well-known diagram of the clean architecture that was put together by Uncle Bob. And in this diagram, you can see that everything is built around the data, which are the entities, and around the business logic, which are the interactors. So in an architecture like that, the outer layers, so the presenters and the views and how you do the persistence, are considered implementation details. And if you use the dependency inversion principle properly, you will be able to isolate your domain logic from the rest, the implementation details that are in your application. That would be the goal. But if you look at this picture, probably you will realize that there is something missing here. And that is, where is the navigation in this picture? Because it's talking about how to do a proper architecture that we can use in order to have a more scalable solution that can be tested, that is more robust. But also you would like to have something that does what is needed, which is navigate from one view to another. And that is not explained in that graph. And the reason for that is that usually navigation is a harder problem and it changes from one platform to the other. And it is hard to give a solution that is comprehensive, that applies to every platform and to every scenario that you have in terms of navigation. So if you want to have a navigation solution that does this properly, probably you should ask yourself about things like, am I able to separate the events, the things that come from the user, and the semantics, what I want to do with those events? Am I able to have a storyboard that tells the other developers how the different views are connected together? And at the same time, do I have view controllers that are separated enough, decoupled enough, so if I do changes, I don't have to change every view controller in my solution? hopefully I'm only changing the one that I have to modify in terms of what I'm adding. Or if I'm just changing the navigation, I wouldn't have to change any of those. So also, if I'm not using storyboards, I will also want to have the capability of changing things without having to modify my view controllers. As it is also important, we would like to be able to inject all the dependencies, all the collaborators that our different parts solution require in order to work properly. And how do we do that? I mean, that is a key part of the solution, because creating things inside of our view controller is always a bad solution. It doesn't allow you to replace parts. It doesn't allow you to do proper unit testing. It doesn't allow you to change the functionality easily. So we would also want to have a solution that allows for good dependency injection. Finally, a key part of a good navigation solution is to do proper memory management. And that is key because we don't want to create a memory leak when we apply our navigation solution to our application. Okay, so let's talk about responsibilities and how they apply. And I'm going to define these responsibilities from the perspective of a very well known to us architectural design pattern, which is model view presenter. Let me ask you very, very fast. Who does model view controller over here? And is awake. Okay. Model view presenter. Some hands, not many. This is far more common in Android. Model view model, the cool kid in town. Okay, far more. Okay, so I'm going to talk about model view presenter, but hold it for a while because I will mention how this applies to model view model. And for those who don't know, model view presenter is an architectural design pattern. As the other two, one of the goals is to have separated presentations, so the model shouldn't be affected by the way the things are displayed to the user interface that you're using. And the three letters of the acronym stand for model, which we are not going to cover in this talk, the view, which includes the view controller for the purpose of the model view presenter, and the presenter who provides the semantics to it. Let me go through each one of them. So the view is the nice thing that we see, and it should be a passive view. By that I mean that it shouldn't hold any logic. It should only hold the ability to present information to the user in a way that it is able to capture the events and pass them on to the presenter. It, however, knows how to do the navigation. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, it is the guy who has the method to do the perform segue, okay? The presenter is the brains behind this architectural design pattern. It's the one that provides semantics to the user events. So when a user taps on a button, is the presenter the one that should decide where to navigate to and how to and when to do it. So that is the guy, the girl in this case, that is going to take the decisions on what has to happen as a result of each of the user events that have been produced. Finally, sorry, that was too fast. Finally, the connector is the one that will know how to put the pieces together in order to navigate. And in order to do that, it will provide the different parts for each of the modules, the ones that are created by having a presenter, the interactors, and any kind of persistence that you wish. And is the one that also takes you from one connector to the next. So it only knows about its view, but it knows how to take you to the next view. Who is the connector responsible for that? And, okay, what if you are using model view model? Then you are wrong. No, the thing is that if you're using model view model, you are not wrong. It's just a different pattern, and it is not that different from the perspective of testability and the way it can be used in our applications. The main difference is that in model view presenter, the presenter is the one that tells the view what to do, how to be updated, what control has to be enabled or disabled, what background has to be changed in terms of color, or what label, what has to be displayed inside of a label. While on the model view model, what you have is a description of what it has to be shown in the view, which is in the view model, and every time this description changes, the view is notified, and it will read this new description and update itself. So as you can see, there's a little bit more of intelligence in the view part for the model view model than it is in the model view presenter. Not only that, it is more natural to give orders from the presenter to the view in the case of model view presenter, which is one of the things that we do in order to navigate to the next view. But other than that, embracing and extending these ideas to model view model is very easy and totally feasible. So let me show you what the modular solution would be, and let me start by decoupling the code that we are going to have here. And the first thing that I would recommend you to do if you have never applied one of these patterns is to start by modifying your view controllers. So you have your view controllers. If you have created one of these beautiful massive view controllers that everything is happening there, what you would have to do is to move all the logic to the next layer, in this case, the presenter. So you create a new class, and everything that means a decision would have to be taken to that presenter. And still, as I was mentioning before, the navigation, the perform segue, will take place in that part. Okay, so let me show you how this will work. And this could be the first view controller of our application, and the view, which includes the view controller, is connected to a presenter that will take the decisions, an interactor that implements the business logic, and a representation of the form that we have chosen to use in order to have persistence in our application. This is a very naive form of doing it. There are far more advanced ways of doing this with factories and so on. But for the sake of this explanation, I think it's more than enough. So notice that also in this view controller, we have its own connector, the one that has put together all these pieces and knows how to connect them together. Okay, so what happens when you want to navigate to a different view controller? Let's assume that you have something there that is the one that is going to trigger navigation. And that could be a plus button on the navigation bar, or a cell that you want to use as a reference to navigate to the detail when the user taps on it. So the user does that, and as a result of that, this event is transmitted to the presenter. Then the presenter, who, as I said before, will provide the semantics for this, tells the view, okay, this means that I want you to navigate to this other view. Okay, so the view will do the perform segue, and a new view controller will be created by the system. That is something that the system does for us. The only problem is that this view controller is not ready to be used. It is not configured. View did load has not been invoked yet. So how do we put all the things together here that we need in order to make this view work? Well, we receive this view controller in the prepare for segue, and then the view tells our connector, the initial connector, I want you to prepare this next view controller. But remember what I told you before. Each connector only knows about its stuff. So this guy over there doesn't know how to configure properly this guy. Instead, what it does is it knows how to create a new connector, and this one is the one that is going to be responsible for creating all the pieces and connecting them. Yeah, more or less. Sleepy? Not much? Ready for a party tonight? Okay. The first thing that we have to do in order to get this solution to work is to avoid having our segues created from our controls, but instead we will create them from the view controller icon that is on top of each of the view controllers on our storyboards. So it is not related to the actual event, but the semantics are provided by the presenter, okay? How does this happen? Well, this is a part of the initial view controller. So in the view controller, I have included here two methods as a reference. One is the one that is invoked as a result of the user tapping on the plus button on the navigation bar. The other one is the one that would be invoked when a user taps on a cell. So it will tell the presenter this is the row that has been selected. Okay? What happens in the presenter? Okay, so in the presenter, it receives these calls to these methods, and when the view controller tells it that the add button has been tapped, it will tell the view, okay, the semantics that are attached to that event are that I want you to navigate to add parameters. Or if the user has selected that cell, I want you to navigate to this detail. Pretty easy. What happens in the view controller? What are the implementations of these two methods that I mentioned? Well, just the perform segue. This is coded in a way that I don't have the string hard-coded here for the segue. It's just an enum to make it simpler, but in any case, what is happening here is that we're telling the operating system, iOS, to create the view controller that is on the other side of the segue. Once we have this view controller created, we are invoked by the operating system again in the view controller, and the prepare for segue is the method that is triggered in order to do that. And for each of the view controllers that we have here, so for the add parameter or for the show parameter, we tell the connector to prepare that view controller. And remember what I said before, this connector doesn't know how to prepare these view controllers. Instead, it knows what are the connectors that are required in order to do that. So it will create a child connector, and that child connector is the one that has this assemble module, receives the view controller, and that's all the connections. So if it has more dependencies, it will inject those dependencies here, and it will connect the things as required here. Okay? Pretty easy. So what happens when I have to do the navigation back? Well, I'm using storyboards, so the proper solution should be unwind segues. And the process is very similar. I only have to perform segue with the unwind segue. And I will do the same. Nothing very different here. So, and if I'm using a drill down navigation, then things should happen very naturally. And I will show you how in a minute. It is very important that for what I'm going to share with you now, we do proper memory management. And by that I mean that we don't create any memory leaks in the process. So let me show you how this has to be so you don't have any problems. We have the initial view controller, the one that has been shown afterwards, and all the solid lines here are strong references. So from the view to the rest, strong references. The references that point to the view are all weak, the dotted lines. Okay? So in order to navigate back, in this case, let's assume that I'm having a navigation bar. This has been presented as a model view controller, and I want to dismiss or save or whatever and navigate back to the original view controller. So what happens here? The first thing that will happen is that an event is triggered. The user taps on the cancel button, and that is told to the presenter. Then the presenter tells the view, I want you to navigate back, perform that unwind segue. And that triggers the deallocation of the view, which in turn, because it's the only one that holds strong references to the rest, will cause the rest of the deallocations. So nothing is left afterwards. What if I have to pass parameters from one to the other? Well, if I have to pass parameters, it is important that I do it in a way that is compatible with the storyboard system. And we have a big problem here, is that the perform segue is completely unrelated to the prepare for segue. We invoke the first one, but the second one, we don't have any control on that. It's the system that calls our view controllers in order to do the prepare for segue. So we could do three things. We could use the parameter that is used as the sender. My recommendation is that you don't do that because the goal, the purpose of that parameter is something completely different. It is meant in order to decide whether you have been invoked by one or other control and then do different things. So please don't use that one. And you can keep the state either in the view controller or in the presenter. If you do if you take the first option, then probably your view would be a little bit smarter. You are adding intelligence to the view. Since what we want to implement here is a passive view, my recommendation would be to go with the state in the presenter. And how is this done? Well, I will show you in the SIPs only presentation, but it was also included in the slide that I put for the navigation for the cell. I'm keeping the state in the presenter, and I will use it later. So in the SIP solution should be very similar to the other one. How does it change? Well, there are a few changes, and some of them are for the better, some of them are for the worse. So the good part is that it is easier to pass the information to the next view controller because we don't have that disconnect between the perform segue and the prepare for segue. Also, it is easier to do the injection. Injection is always easier if you do it through the initializer, the constructor for other languages, than if you do it through a property. You don't need implicitly unwraps and things similar to that. So that is far easier. The worst part is that the presentation has to be done by the source. It has to decide whether this is a modally presented view controller or not, and you lose the big picture and the unwind segues that come for free in the storyboard. So this is a bit of code that will show you how the injection is done, which is you have the presenter over there. The presenter is going to be used in the view controller. And as you see here, I have defined an initializer that takes the presenter as a parameter and will invoke this initializer that is the one that you normally would use in order to create a view controller. Remember, for those who don't use very often, that if you don't use any name, it will use the same name of the class with a .zip extension. And it does the connection, but the connection, as you can see here, is easier than in the other case. On the other hand, when you want to pass the information, it is easier because you just pass it here as a parameter to the navigation, and it is immediately available to the next view controller. And here it shows how the view controller is presented because it's returned as a result of that. Okay? Not much difference. So I hope that you have liked the solution and that it solves your problems in terms of navigation. But I would also like to reinforce this idea with some benefits that I believe come with this solution. The first one is inherent to the fact of using dependency injection. Since we are using dependency injection and our view controllers don't know anything about how the things have to be in order to talk to them, it just knows that they have to have an interface. Well, we can change the pieces that are there in order to have different functionality. Or a very simple example is that if you are creating a social network application, probably the snapshots that you want to put on the App Store are not the ones that are captures of the day of your results in your timelines. Probably you want to have a more controlled environment, so you fake the data and you provide data that is hopefully good to be seen in the snapshots. And that is trivial. I mean, like, there's nothing to be done there. We can just have to create them properly in the connector. If we add something else, if we add, for example, a logger, or if we add some analytics, anything is connected through the connector, and the rest of the pieces don't know about that. And if we are going to reuse a piece, we can pass it from one connector to the next, because let me remind you that they are chained, okay? Another thing that could be an advantage is that this code is fully testable. And what I mean by fully testable is fully testable. So I can show you code if you want to see it, grab me later, and I will show you a 99% coverage in an application for that. So this is a way to test your navigation, and this is just a way to check that the connector is invoked and the navigation is invoked when you perform the segue. Pretty easy, you just inject a fake connector and you check that this method is the one that is triggered as a result of the perform segue. So you are able to test everything that is relevant in terms of events. I'm not talking about animations here. I'm talking about going to the right view controller, injecting the proper properties or collaborators, doing things properly in terms of unit testing. Finally, another example that is, I believe that is far more common nowadays than it used to be, that is doing A/B testing. Since we are separating the events from the semantics, we can provide the semantics whenever we wish. And we can use those semantics to separate, to decide a different destination for the navigation. So we can inject an object that will take care of the decision of whether it should go to option A or option B of a navigation controller. And when we are going to navigate, when we receive that event, when we are providing the semantics to that event, we will decide to go with one or the other. Very simple. So I think I have still enough time, so let me go with a very brief recap of what we did. What I have shared with you is a solution for navigation. And I usually work with companies to help them with their architectures. I train people about how to implement advanced architectures, and I do it both for iOS and Android. And usually the goal is to have something that is, it cannot be exactly the same because of the difference of the platform, but it has to be somehow easy to share ideas, not to share code, to share ideas and to help each team, or from one team to the other, with the different problems that they may have in terms of their architecture. So the closer the solution is, the better. And what I have provided you here is a navigation solution for a potential implementation of an advanced architecture. I'm not claiming that this could be the only solution. I'm just saying that this is one that matches our requirements in terms of separating the responsibilities. What is important here is that this solution is modular, and we can reuse parts of the solution. We can move the pieces very easily. We can decide different destinations for our navigation without affecting the pieces that are unrelated to that responsibility. Not only that, I think that by using this navigation, we still can take advantage of a passive view pattern, which is very helpful in order to reduce the amount of testing that you have to do in the view. If you use a passive view, if your view has no logic in it, testing the view is trivial, because the only thing that you have to test is that the events that go from the view to the presenter are the ones that you expect, and that when you invoke the methods that can be called from the presenter, the effect that you want is what happens there. That is it. And hopefully, I have proven that the solution that I have shared with you can be used both with storyboards and with SIBs, so you are not bound to one or the other decision, which is obviously the right one because the one that you took. But no matter what you choose, you will still be able to use a modular navigation for that. It is easy to implement, and it is even easier to maintain. So reusing parts of the navigation and making changes to it is trivial. And, well, it has clear benefits. All the things that I mentioned in terms of testability, of the ability to do A/B testing, and doing the modular solution are there. So, without any other comments, I hope that you have liked the presentation. Thank you very much. Share. Terima kasih and Nanri.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions now, I will be more than glad to try to answer them. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thank you, CC. Any questions from the floor? Oh, I see.
Hi everyone. Do you think using Breeze is a good idea when we use Clean Swift?
Do I think it's a good... Sorry, can you repeat?
Do you think using Breeze?
Saves.
Breeze. There is an option to use Breeze when we use Clean Swift. Like connector. There's an option to use Breeze.
Breeze?
Yeah.
Oh, to use a bridge instead of the connector?
Yeah. In Clean Swift, when we use Clean Swift.
Okay, so I'm not particularly bold on using one solution or another. I really think that architecture is not a one solution fits all. It's more a solution to the problems that you have. So if the solution that you're using, if using bridges solves the needs that you have, go with it. I mean, like, this is just a solution that was trying to address the problems that I was mentioning at the beginning, and that had the extra benefits that I mentioned at the end. But I don't think I have used the bridges that you mentioned. But if you want to use them and they solve the problems that you have, and particularly one of the things that I didn't mention is that this allows for collaboration in the team. And a good architecture should be one that doesn't enforce the rest of the team to wait while you do something. And that is key if we are working with a team that is not made of one. If this addresses your problems, I have no comment against that. I mean, like, go with it by any means. Okay, if you have any code like that, please grab me later and I can show it. I can see it and check it with you. I mean,
sure, I have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Okay.
My name is Asif. I have a very small question. So connectors would be connected with view controllers, right?
Yeah.
So for example, if we have one view controller, that from one place we want to present as a push, and from one place we want to present as a maybe pop-up or whatever. So how would you facilitate that into connector? Would be like one option would be to make two connectors, one would be to probably pass a parameter to connector to, what about the transitions? What are your suggestions around this?
Okay, so as I said before, for each view, you will have one connector only. But this connector knows how to do every navigation task that are related to it. Not by doing the connections afterwards, but by knowing which connector it should talk to. So each of the navigation, if you want to show a pop-up, or if you want to do a model presentation, there will be different methods of the original connector, and whatever is going to be invoked is a different connector that can be reused if this view controller is used in another part of the application. So the only thing is, I know that I have to call this guy in order to do this navigation, and I know that I have to call this other guy in order to do this other kind of navigation. That is also very common in the case of the split view controller. I mean, like, if you use a split view controller in a universal application, you want to be addressing the different scenarios, the ones that show both at the same time, while the one that if you're running that in the iPhone, it's showing just one and navigating to the next. which is also important here. So the connector should take care of that. It should be able to know when to invoke one or the other depending on that. And same thing happens with tab navigation. Same thing.
Okay, so just to clear up, so the connector of the destination view controller would actually resolve this by checking which connector I am being called from?
The destination, I mean like in the source view controller,
Yes.
it will invoke a different method of the original connector
Okay.
depending on the segue that is going to perform. I mean like it's being invoked for one, and then this navigation implies talking to a different connector.
Okay, understood.
Is that clear now?
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there, we can have one more last question? Okay, if that's okay. Oh, okay.
Hi,
Hi.
thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
So what do you think about view containment? So let's say we have two view controllers with all the modules inside. So now we want to display two basically view containment. How do you propose?
That's an excellent question. So the navigation scenarios that I mentioned here are the simpler ones. But there are two different scenarios that are more challenging. One is when you use embedded view controllers, which is more or less what I understood you were asking. And the other one is when I have a view controller that spans through more than one view. Or properly said the other way around, a view that spans through more than one view controller. One example of that would be boarding to an application. So you do like, what is your name? Next view. Do you want to create a password? Next view. Do you accept the terms? Next view. So the relationship between view controllers and navigation is different in these cases. I mean, sometimes you can reuse, like in the case of onboarding, you can reuse the connector through the different stages of the view. On the other side, if you want to reuse components, embedded view controllers, you want to have, even though you have one big view, like in the case of the split view controller, you want to have a connector that addresses only that part of the functionality. And if it doesn't have anything to do in terms of navigation, it will not address that part. It will just take care of the connections. That's it. But if it does some navigation inside of this embedded view, then it will address those in that view controller. Does this answer your question? You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. I guess navigation can be really complicated, but if you have any more questions, you can look for Greg or any of the like speakers and ask them how they handle navigation. Okay, thank you, Greg.